My name is Jennifer Caldwell, and I never expected my quiet life would be upended by a middle-aged woman with a penchant for meddling in everyone's business. In the United States, especially in suburban neighborhoods, there's a phenomenon called the Homeowners Association, HOA. Ideally, an HOA is formed to keep neighborhoods neat and organized. That's the goal, at least. But in real life, as I soon discovered, things can go disastrously wrong when the wrong person seizes power. I was new to Laurelwood Park, a neat, tree-lined residential community near the outskirts of a thriving city. I'd chosen this neighborhood because it was known for its lush greenery, well-tended gardens, and classic American houses featuring wide porches and picket fences. The sense of small-town charm within reach of a bustling city was too appealing to resist. The neighbors, so I'd been told, were considerate, helpful, and tight-knit. Indeed, for the most part, they were. But then there was her. The HOA member in question, a 50-something-year-old woman named Marcia Amberton, was known by just about everyone as Karen. She took this label to a new dimension, embracing the worst of every Karen stereotype you can imagine. Intrusive, loud, perpetually offended, and eternally convinced that her opinions were the only ones that mattered. With short, perfectly coiffed hair and a piercing glare, she seemed as though she'd formed out of the very air of entitlement and mania swirling around her. Her official position was head of neighborhood aesthetics and compliance in the Laurelwood Park HOA. But make no mistake, Marcia wielded her role like an iron scepter. In the unfolding story, I learned how a single person's arrogance could undo the peace of an entire community. I also learned just how deeply one's secrets could be hidden. You see, I'm not just your typical homeowner. I'm the chief prosecutor in our district. Though I generally keep that detail under wraps, preferring people to know me as a helpful neighbor rather than the local face of the law, Marcia was about to force my hand. She made one cataclysmic decision, removing the neighborhood streetlights that plunged the neighborhood into literal darkness. And in that darkness, criminal elements found ample opportunity to wreak havoc, turning our idyllic corner into a hotbed of burglary and vandalism. How do we get there? How did it all unravel? And how did I finally bring justice to Laurelwood Park, restoring not only the lights, but also a sense of communal safety? I invite you to join me on this tumultuous, surprising journey. Strap in. This is how one Karen changed everything, and how, in the end, I showed her I wasn't just another meek neighbor whose complaints could be easily dismissed. Welcome to my story. I arrived at my new home on a bright Saturday morning. The moving truck idled as boxes, furniture, and suitcases were unloaded by 3 sturdy movers I'd hired. The house was a lovely 2-story Cape Cod with a baby blue exterior, wide windows, and a manicured front lawn that the previous owners had obviously taken great pride in maintaining. My best friend, Aisha, helped me that day, rummaging through boxes while making jokes about my questionable taste in old detective novels. I collect first editions. Little by little, the place started feeling like home. That evening, while we were sorting out the kitchen, there was a knock on the door. Aisha and I shared a look of pleasant surprise. Could it be a neighbor welcoming me to the block with baked goods? An invitation to a barbecue? When I opened the door, I found a petite, impeccably dressed woman with short, layered hair and a severe expression on her face. She wore a crisp button-down blouse and pastel slacks, carrying a clipboard close to her chest. "Jennifer Caldwell?" she asked in a brisk tone. "Yes," I replied. "That's me." She thrust out her hand. "Marcia Amberton. I'm the head of Neighborhood Aesthetics and Compliance, part of the Laurelwood Park Homeowners Association." "Welcome." "Thank you," I said, taking her hand for a quick shake. "It's great to finally be here." Her eyes flicked behind me, as though assessing the state of my half-unpacked house. "It's nice to have new residents. We like to keep things in top condition here in Laurelwood Park, so if you need to review the community guidelines, don't hesitate to contact me. It's important we all uphold certain standards." She handed me a folder with HOA policies inside, guidelines on grass length, mailbox colors, fence heights, trash placement, and about 100 other minute rules. I try not to let my facial expression betray how daunting the list seemed. As politely as I could manage, I thanked her. "And do remember, Marcia continued, the HOA is more than just a set of rules. It's about ensuring a shared sense of respect. We've got eyes on everything here, so if you ever have questions or concerns, she gave me a pointed stare. Bring them to me. I forced a smile. Right. Thanks, I appreciate it. With that, Marcia's lips formed something of a forced grin. She pivoted on her heel and took her leave, never once asking how the move was going, if I needed any help, or if I was settling in okay. Aisha let out a low whistle from behind me. Geez, that one's intense. She has that vibe, you know. I laughed, though it was uneasy. Oh, I know exactly what you mean. It was a less than welcoming encounter, but I shook it off and went back to unpacking. People talked. Perhaps Marcia was simply a strict caretaker of the neighborhood. I assured myself we'd get along fine. After all, how bad could she be? The next couple of weeks were relatively peaceful. I met several other neighbors, like the friendly Grant couple across the street, who brought me a pie, and old Mr. Reynolds, who waved at me every morning from his porch. Everywhere I turned, people seemed genial and happy that a new face had joined the community. But Marcia, who quickly became known in my own mind as Karen, thanks to everyone's whispered jokes, was always in the background. I'd catch glimpses of her car creeping along the block, as though she were patrolling for the slightest code violation. A mailbox slightly crooked, she'd issue a notice. A garden with a single weed? A stern warning. If a house's garage door needed a fresh coat of paint, she would pounce, drafting a formal complaint with the HOA letterhead. Her capacity for nosing into private matters was legendary. I once saw her scold a neighbor for feeding stray cats. Another time, she marched right up to the front porch of an elderly woman who was growing roses in pots that apparently weren't in compliance with the color scheme of the community. The poor woman stood there, confused, but apologized all the same, promising to swap out the planters. The general consensus among my new acquaintances was that Marcia took her position in the HOA to extremes. Her official reason was always protecting the property values of Laurelwood Park, but her tone, behavior, and near-obsessive tendencies felt like she thrived on controlling others. It wasn't long before I felt that control inching closer to my property line. One sunny afternoon, I was out in the yard pulling weed from my flower beds. My phone buzzed with a text from Aisha. How's the new place treating you? I was about to answer when I saw Marcia striding up my driveway. Eyes zeroed in on something near my porch. Jennifer, she said, not bothering with a greeting. We have to talk. I braced myself. Yes. This evening, the HOA board has a meeting. I assume you're aware we hold monthly sessions. I'd heard mention of them, but I hadn't been in the neighborhood long enough to attend one. I've heard about them, but I didn't realize it was tonight. Marcia's lips pursed. It's on page 3 of that welcome pamphlet I gave you. She tapped her clipboard. We need you there. There's a matter concerning the height of your hedges and a few other items on the agenda. I frowned. Is there a complaint about the hedges? I thought they were well maintained. Her eyebrows rose. They're borderline. Also, there's a tree branch from your maple that looks dangerously close to your neighbor's fence. This is the sort of thing we need to discuss. I glanced at the boundary line. I can trim that if it's becoming an issue. We'll talk more at the meeting, she cut in. 8 o'clock sharp at the clubhouse. Don't be late. And just like that, she was gone, leaving me with a swirl of annoyance. I couldn't quite understand her intensity, but I decided it was in my best interest to attend. Besides, it might be a good way to learn more about the community's dynamics. Little did I know, that night would be the first stepping stone into a larger drama that would engulf us all. That evening, I walked into the clubhouse, a small building on the far side of our neighborhood, typically reserved for community events and weekly HOA meetings. It had white siding, a small sign labeling it as Laurelwood Park Community Center, and a modest interior with folding chairs set out in rows. When I arrived, roughly 15 to 20 people were seated, chatting softly. At the front of the room was a long table where 5 individuals sat. In the center, of course, was Marcia, dressed in a crisp blazer and wearing an expression of self-importance. To her right was a thin man with glasses named Gregory Marshall, the HOA treasurer. On her left was an elderly woman named Joan Garcia, the secretary. The other two were lesser-known board members. Marcia banged a small gavel on the table to quiet the room. Meeting is called to order at 8 o'clock. Let's start with new business. A few minutes passed in the typical small-scale bureaucracy. Someone complained about dogs barking at night. Another person asked about repainting the lines in the community parking areas, etc. Marcia nodded along, sometimes scribbling notes. But eventually, her eyes locked on me. Now, let's address a concern about hedge height and sidewalk clearance outside 174 Pinecrest Lane. The new homeowner, Ms. Jennifer Caldwell. She spoke with the practiced authority of someone who relished these small displays of power. Jennifer, would you please stand and address the board? I rose from my seat, trying to maintain a courteous expression. Sure, I'm happy to address any concerns. Marcia tapped her pen. Your front hedges exceed the maximum allowable height by approximately 4 inches. According to Section 3, Paragraph 2 of the Laurelwood Park Covenants, hedges in front yards must not exceed 40 inches in height. Yours are at 44 inches. Additionally, there is a maple tree branch that extends over your neighbor's fence line. The root system is also close to pushing onto your neighbor's property. These are issues we take very seriously. Her tone, so grave and pompous, made me want to roll my eyes, but I refrained. Instead, I calmly responded, I'll get them trimmed immediately. I apologize for the oversight. She nodded stiffly. We'll give you 2 weeks. After that, we'll have to issue a formal notice with potential fines. Understood? Yes, I said, understood. It wasn't a big deal, really, just standard HOA procedure for enforcing landscaping rules. But the intensity with which she addressed these minor infractions felt disproportionate. I wasn't alone in that sentiment. Several neighbors looked bored or exasperated, a few rolling their eyes when Marcia wasn't looking. After the hedge discussion, the meeting droned on for another hour. Discussion of budgets, a plan for new benches at the local park, recarpeting the clubhouse, etc. Then came the last item. Marcia took a breath. There's one more pressing topic, she said. As you know, we've been exploring cost-saving measures to maintain our budget responsibly. The HOA board has determined that the monthly electricity costs for our community streetlights are higher than anticipated. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Gregory, the treasurer, cleared his throat, but Marcia pressed on. After careful consideration, the board feels that it may be prudent to minimize or remove certain streetlights, particularly those on side streets with less traffic, to offset rising costs. We'd rely instead on personal outdoor lighting and motion sensors from homeowners, which would be a more direct approach to security. A murmur of confusion and disagreement rippled through the audience. Someone near the back asked, "What about safety? Streetlights deter criminal activity, and kids often play outside." Marcia drew herself up. We have to prioritize funds for more pressing issues, like clubhouse maintenance, landscaping, and legal fees for the covenant enforcements. The board has done a cost analysis, and cutting back on electricity usage from these streetlights could save us thousands per year. And truly, most of these lights are purely aesthetic after a certain hour. A tall man in the crowd, Martin Ferris, stood. I strongly disagree, Marcia. Street lighting is crucial for neighborhood safety. I have teenage kids who come home late from after-school activities. Without proper lighting, they'll be vulnerable to accidents or worse. Several heads nodded in agreement. But Marcia raised her voice. We have limited resources. The board believes we should decommission certain lights while leaving a few critical ones near main intersections. We may reevaluate in the future if the budget allows. The tension in the room was palpable. The meeting soon ended in a swirl of arguments, with Marcia proclaiming the board's final stance. In the coming weeks, the side street lights would be turned off or outright removed. Many people left feeling uneasy. A neighbor, seeing me stand near the exit, commented to me, "This is a bad idea, and she's shoving it down our throats without a real vote." I nodded. It definitely seems questionable, but we'll see what happens. Little did I realize that questionable was an understatement, and that Marcia's stubbornness would cause one of the worst crises Laurelwood Park had ever faced. Over the next few weeks, a sense of dread settled over the neighborhood. As promised or threatened, really. Marcia and the HOA board arranged for electricians to systematically disable entire rows of streetlights. One by one, these tall lampposts that once bathed our streets with a welcoming glow at night were extinguished, leaving only darkness. In some cases, they weren't just turned off, they were physically removed. Trucks came in, and workers dug up the poles. It was jarring to see the skeleton-like holes where streetlights once stood. The main thoroughfares kept a few lights, but side roads that wound through the suburb were plunged into unsettling gloom as soon as the sun set. Neighbors complained incessantly. Residents with children worried about them walking home after dusk. The elderly felt uneasy taking evening strolls. We tried to appeal to the rest of the HOA board, but Marcia had a majority coalition. Even the treasurer, Gregory, seemed uneasy but ultimately caved under her pushy leadership. Despite protests and petition signs that popped up in yards, the streetlights were systematically removed or shut down. I personally felt the sting of this darkness. After finishing work, for I never openly advertised my role as chief prosecutor to the entire neighborhood, I'd come home to an unlit street, forced to rely on my car's headlights to navigate the final stretch. Porch lights flickered here and there, but it was nowhere near the illumination we once had. Marcia, for her part, was insufferable. I overheard her on the sidewalk one evening, telling a concerned neighbor, "This is what progress looks like. We can't waste money on frivolous lights when we need funds for more important communal benefits." "But how is it a communal benefit if we can't see at night?" the neighbor asked incredulously. Marcia merely sniffed and strode away, unbothered. In a matter of days, the shift in atmosphere was tangible. Where Laurelwood Park once seemed vibrant in the evenings, families biking, neighbors chatting, porch lights shining, it now felt eerie after sunset. A hush fell over the streets, broken by the occasional bark of a dog or the rattle of a trash bin. No one realized yet that removing these streetlights would invite a far more dangerous element into our quiet suburb. For about a week, we all tried to adjust. People installed motion detector lights on their front porches. Some placed floodlights in their driveways. Others started carpooling to ensure no one had to walk alone. It was inconvenient, but in the grand scheme of life, we hoped we'd adapt. Then the first incident occurred. Mrs. Patterson, who lived near the far end of the neighborhood, reported her car had been broken into. The passenger window was smashed, and her purse, which she'd left under a seat, was stolen. The thieves also rummaged through her glove compartment. A small detail, sure, but in Laurelwood Park, such an incident was rare, practically unheard of. A couple of days later, the Ferris family woke up to find their garage door partly open and several power tools missing. Their security camera, installed above the garage, captured shadowy figures creeping around the driveway in the early hours. The thieves vanished into the darkness on foot. Within a short span, petty crime exploded across the neighborhood. Mail stolen from boxes, packages disappearing off porches, fences vandalized with graffiti. We even heard rumors of a home break-in attempt, though the official police statement was vague. The darkness that fell every evening was an open invitation to criminals. Most of us called the police to report these incidents, but the blame fell squarely on the HOA's new policy. Laurelwood Park was no longer well lit, and criminals took advantage of that. Our sense of security, once a hallmark of suburban peace, was shattered. The rumor mill spun. Some neighbors said they'd seen suspicious vehicles with tinted windows cruising slowly. Others suspected local delinquents from the city next door. Regardless of the specifics, one fact remained. The removal of streetlights correlated almost perfectly with the spike in crime. Marcia refused to entertain the notion that her decision was at fault. When confronted, her standard line was, "Crime can happen anywhere. It's not the HOA's job to nanny every single situation. People need to take responsibility for their own security." Her dismissive attitude only fueled resentment among the neighbors, who demanded the streetlights be reinstated. Tensions soared. In hushed conversations, I heard neighbors calling Marcia a tyrant. However, nobody had an immediate solution. The HOA budget, shaped largely by Marcia's directives, had already diverted funds into other projects. Reinstalling the streetlights would apparently require yet another costly operation, one the board didn't want to approve. And so, the darkness deepened. Night after night, as I drove along the murky streets, I couldn't help but feel a knot of worry in my stomach. If the petty crime continued to escalate, someone would get hurt. I faced my own internal struggle. My job as a prosecutor was to serve justice, but I'd always kept that side of my life private in my own neighborhood, not wanting to mix my personal and professional spheres. Yet the time was coming when that secrecy would no longer be an option. The community needed help, and the legal ramifications of Marsha's decision were far-reaching. In the aftermath of these crimes, homeowners began to gather privately in each other's living rooms to discuss strategies outside the official HOA structure. Many believed that the formal board was compromised, or at the very least under Marsha's iron thumb. I attended one such gathering at the Ferris home. About a dozen neighbors pulled together around the living room couch, speaking in low tones. The mood was a mix of anger and desperation. "Did you hear about the break-in last night on Maple Ridge Lane?" Linda, one of the neighbors, asked. "They actually kicked in the back door." The family was terrified. Martin Ferris nodded gravely. "The criminals took jewelry and electronics, apparently. This is getting out of hand." An older man with a cane, Mr. Healy, stared into his coffee cup. "I've lived here 30 years and never seen anything like this. It's clear that removing the streetlights was an open invitation. We need to fight back." "How, though?" asked a younger resident named Yolanda. "Marsha and her board basically control the HOA. They're the ones that decide on the lights, not us." A hush fell until all eyes rested on me. Unbeknownst to them, I carried a lot more weight than just my single homeowner's vote. But I hadn't yet revealed my real profession. I cleared my throat, deciding to give a small push in the right direction without fully divulging everything. "Well," I ventured, "we might consider legal action if it can be shown that the HOA's removal of streetlights knowingly compromises public safety." Martin nodded. "I've looked into that a bit. Some states have laws requiring HOAs to maintain certain safety standards. But the question is whether our local ordinances or the covenants legally obligate the HOA to keep the lights. Still," Yolanda said, "lawsuits are expensive and complicated. Who would even represent us?" I looked around at the anxious faces, many of whom didn't have the resources to embark on a major legal battle. Part of me wanted to blurt out, "I'm the chief prosecutor for our district, and I know exactly how to handle this," but I bit my tongue, still unsure if I was ready to be that open. Instead, I said, "We might not need a full lawsuit. We can start with a demand letter, possibly with a petition signed by all who are concerned. If enough people show they're ready to fight, the board might have no choice but to reconsider." Linda snapped her fingers. "Yes, a petition. Let's do that. We'll gather signatures from every resident who wants the streetlights back. That might show the board how serious we are." The group erupted in agreement. We spent the next hour drafting a plan to canvass the neighborhood, collect signatures, and then present them at the next HOA meeting in a unified front. It was a spark of hope, of neighbors rallying together to restore safety. Yet in my gut, I felt uneasy. Marsha was stubborn, and her pride, along with her taste for power, made her unstoppable in petty matters. Would a mere petition suffice against her? Or would this become a test of wills that led to something bigger? Still, we parted that evening with renewed determination. We'd gather, we'd unify, and we'd force Marsha's hand. The petition drive commenced swiftly. Neighbors knocked on doors, explained the situation, and secured signatures. Word spread that if you were tired of the dark streets and the spiking crime, this was your chance to voice your demands. We gained hundreds of signatures in a matter of days, a resounding majority of Laurelwood Park residents. Confidence grew among our group that we'd show the petition at the next HOA meeting, prove there was overwhelming support for reinstating the streetlights, and maybe, just maybe, pressure the board to reverse course. But we underestimated Marsha. She caught wind of the petition and, true to her controlling nature, launched a campaign of intimidation. Neighbors started receiving threatening letters from the HOA. The letters cited obscure rules, accusing them of minor infractions, from unauthorized lawn decorations to paint that doesn't match the approved color palette. Fines and penalties were threatened in bold letters. While not everyone got such a letter, the pattern was clear enough. The petition's most vocal supporters were getting singled out. At first, it was easy to dismiss these as petty scare tactics. But for some families on tight budgets, even the threat of a $200 fine was alarming. I saw the stress in their eyes. Some worried about legal entanglements with the HOA. One evening, while collecting the last round of signatures, I noticed a black SUV idling near the curb. Its headlights were off, and the driver's silhouette was barely visible in the gloom. It gave me an unsettling vibe, like someone was watching from within. As soon as I turned toward it, the vehicle's engine revved, and it glided away. The next day, Linda told me she'd seen the same SUV following her when she was out walking her dog. We concluded it might be Marcia, or someone working under her instructions, scoping out who was leading the charge against her. Such intimidation only fueled our resolve further. I tried to calmly reassure neighbors that legally, there was little the HOA could do if the residents were united. If we stick together, I said, we have a strong case. Yet quietly, I felt the time drawing near to step up and use my professional expertise. This was more than a simple neighborhood dispute. It was shaping up into a case of harassment and potential complicity in fostering an unsafe environment. The week before the next HOA meeting was tense. People were on edge, not only from fear of criminal acts in the dark, but also from being bullied by Marcia's regime. Crime incidents continued. The local police, stretched thin, did what they could, but they had limited resources. Our once peaceful suburb was becoming a place where no one felt safe after sunset. I spent a great deal of my daytime hours in the city courthouse, leading the prosecution on various criminal cases. My coworkers noticed my stress. Assistant District Attorney Evelyn Park asked me over lunch one day, "Jen, you seem distracted. Everything okay?" I hesitated. "It's my neighborhood," I finally admitted. "We have an HOA that decided to remove all but a few streetlights, and now there's a big crime spike. The community is in chaos." She gave me a sympathetic look. "Why don't you get the city or county officials involved? They might have some jurisdiction or authority to reinstate those lights if the HOA is endangering public safety." "I'm considering it," I said, "but I want to try a direct approach first. Push the HOA to reverse the decision. If that fails, I'll escalate." Evelyn nodded, respecting my caution. From past experience, I knew that involving city or county authorities would turn the neighborhood into a legal battleground, which could tear it apart. But if there was no other way, I would do it. When I returned home that evening, I found a note taped to my door. "Ms. Caldwell, we have noticed activities that may violate certain HOA guidelines. You are hereby advised to remove any non-compliant decor or landscaping enhancements by the end of the week to avoid fines. Sincerely, the Laurelwood Park Homeowners Association." Marcia Ambin, Head of Neighborhood Aesthetics and Compliance. My brow furrowed. I read it twice. It was nonsense. I had a simple porch light and a small pot of flowers. That was it. There was nothing out of compliance about them. This was clearly a retaliatory move by Marcia. That was the last straw. She'd just made this personal, and my tolerance for her intimidation had run dry. I realized that I could no longer stand by passively. The next HOA meeting was in 3 days, and I resolved to stand up for the entire neighborhood. It was time to fully reveal who I was and what I could do. On the night of the meeting, the community center was packed beyond anything I'd seen before. Word had spread of the petition, of how a majority wanted the streetlights back, and how Marcia was trying to silence people. Tension sizzled in the air. People lined the walls, some forced to stand. Even those who typically avoided HOA drama felt compelled to witness what would surely be a major confrontation. At the front table sat the same 5 board members, including Gregory, the treasurer, and Joan, the secretary. Marcia presided in the center, her expression a flinty mask. She rapped her gavel. "Order, please. This is an official meeting of the Laurelwood Park Homeowners Association. As always, we'll begin with old business." She droned on about landscaping, fence repairs, and so on. Every minute felt like an hour. I spotted Linda gripping a thick sheaf of papers, the petition. Martin Ferris gave me a nod from across the room. The plan was for Linda to publicly present the petition as soon as there was space on the agenda. Finally, Marcia announced, "Now, on to new business. Ms. Joan Garcia, do we have items from the community to address?" Joan cleared her throat. "We do. First, we have a petition signed by the majority of our residents, demanding the immediate reinstatement of the streetlights." The crowd buzzed with excitement. Marcia frowned, as if this was the first she'd officially heard of it. She motioned for Linda to approach with the petition. Linda stepped forward, voice trembling slightly, but still firm. "This petition has 450 signatures," Linda said. "We represent families, seniors, single adults, everyone who is deeply concerned about our neighborhood safety. The crime reports in the last 2 weeks alone prove that darkness has emboldened criminals. We demand that the HOA reverse its decision and reinstall the streetlights, or at least restore the ones that have only been disconnected." Cheers and applause erupted from the crowd. Marcia let it subside before responding coldly. "Thank you, Ms. Linda. However, the board has already voted on this matter. The monthly electrical costs are too high. It's not just about the cost, either. It's about our covenant. The board sets these guidelines, and the majority of the board agrees with the decision." Angry murmurs spread. Martin Ferris raised a hand. "I'm on the board, and I want the record to show I do not agree with that decision." Gregory, the treasurer, shifted uncomfortably. "I also have reservations. The cost might be high, but we can explore alternatives." Marcia shot them a withering glare. "You both know the majority vote is final." "Joan." She looked expectantly at the secretary, who lowered her gaze. "Unless you have changed your mind too, the board's decision stands." Joan shook her head, but she looked unhappy about it. There was an exasperated cry from the audience, and someone shouted, "You're going to kill our property values and maybe kill us in the process if criminals run rampant." I decided the time was now. Stepping forward, I cleared my throat. "Ms. Amberton, with all due respect, the community has clearly spoken. In addition, as a legal professional, I want to note that an HOA holds responsibility for common areas, including ensuring basic safety. Negligence in this area can lead to liability." Marcia's eyes narrowed. Legal professional? And you are?" I turned to the crowd. "I've tried to keep my personal and professional life separate, but I am Jennifer Caldwell, Chief Prosecutor for this district." A collective gasp went through the room. My neighbors, who knew only that I worked in law, looked at me wide-eyed. Marcia's complexion changed. Her haughty expression faltered for just a second before she composed herself. "Well, Ms. Caldwell," she said in a clipped tone, "your position doesn't override the HOA's authority. We have the right to manage our budget as we see fit. The financial benefits. There's no financial benefit worth risking residents' safety," I interjected. "You've removed or disabled critical infrastructure that deters crime. The direct correlation between the lack of streetlights and the recent spike in criminal activity is undeniable. As Chief Prosecutor, I am legally bound to protect the public interest, including holding responsible parties accountable when their decisions contribute to unsafe conditions." Marcia's lips tightened. I took a breath and continued, letting my voice carry. "I'm aware the HOA can't be sued for every minor issue, but this decision arguably constitutes negligence, especially if there's evidence you were warned of the foreseeable risks. We have documented crime reports, and we have a petition that demonstrates the vast majority opposes this measure. If the HOA refuses to reverse it, we'll explore all legal avenues, including a possible civil suit for endangering public safety. Furthermore, should it emerge that any board member is intentionally ignoring this danger, that could lead to individual liability." An electric energy coursed through the crowd. Hope, relief, and righteous anger, all mingling. Marcia stared me down, refusing to flinch, but I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Her voice trembled slightly. "This is a simple matter of budget, Ms. Caldwell. You can't just threaten legal action because you don't agree with a decision." I locked eyes with her. "I'm not threatening. I'm stating facts. The law is clear. HOAs have a duty not to act recklessly regarding community safety. Removing streetlights en masse can easily be construed as reckless, especially in light of our current crime statistics. If you persist in ignoring the will and welfare of the community, we will hold you accountable. A hush spread over the meeting. For the first time, Marcia didn't have a quick retort. She pressed her lips together, glancing at Gregory, who stared back with an ambivalent shrug. Joan couldn't look anyone in the eye. The tension was palpable. Finally, Marcia cleared her throat. This matter is tabled for now. The board will reconvene privately to consider potential modifications to the lighting policy. Meeting adjourned. She slammed the gavel down and stood up, ignoring the outcry from the crowd. But no matter how she tried to maintain composure, she couldn't hide that I'd rattled her. The mighty Karen had just realized she was up against more than a few angry neighbors. She was up against the law. Despite the dramatic showdown, Marcia refused to make any official change right away. Days turned into a week, and the neighborhood still lay in darkness every night. It seemed that she was digging in her heels, or at the very least, delaying as long as possible to maintain a shred of control. We tried to follow up with the other board members. Gregory assured me they were reviewing the budget to see how quickly the lights could be reinstated. Joan mentioned they were discussing selective reinstatement, but no final decision had been reached. Meanwhile, Marcia stayed silent and out of sight, and, tragically, the crime continued. One Sunday morning, I heard sirens wail down the street. Another break-in, this one more aggressive, with the homeowner actually confronting the burglars. An altercation ensued, and though no one was gravely hurt, it was a terrifying escalation. When the police took statements, several neighbors pointed to the lack of streetlights again, complaining that criminals felt emboldened by the darkness. The authorities made official notes, which only bolstered our potential legal case against the HOA. I drafted a memo to the board, stating that if they didn't reinstate lighting by the end of the month, I'd file a formal complaint with the county. The memo laid out the legal precedents around HOA negligence, referencing local codes that mandated safe common spaces. I signed it not only with my name, but also with my title as Chief Prosecutor, ensuring they understood the gravity. A few days later, while returning from the grocery store, I saw a figure stepping onto my porch. Immediately alert, I parked my car and hurried up the walkway. To my relief, it was Gregory, the treasurer, who looked anxious and kept glancing over his shoulder. "Gregory," I greeted. "What brings you here?" He held a sealed envelope. "I don't have much time. I'm supposed to meet Marcia at the clubhouse in 15 minutes. But I wanted you to have this." He handed me the envelope. Inside were financial statements, meeting minutes, and a ledger of the HOA's spending for the past 6 months. My eyes widened as I skimmed them. There were line items referencing landscaping improvements, legal consultation, and miscellaneous reimbursements to board members that seemed suspiciously high. Gregory shook his head. "Look, I don't want any part of this. Marcia has been reallocating funds for personal projects, some of which have nothing to do with the community. See here." He pointed to a ledger entry labeled Aesthetic Consulting Fee. That's actually her niece's business, which doesn't exist beyond a P.O. box. She's funneling HOA money to her own family. A chill ran through me. So that's why she was so determined to cut costs on streetlights. She wanted to free up fund for these pet projects? Gregory nodded gravely. She's also planning to push a special assessment soon to get even more money from homeowners to fund expansions of the clubhouse. She says it's for community benefit, but I'm worried it's just another way for her to skim off the top. I looked him in the eye. "Gregory, you understand that if what you're showing me is correct, this is not just a civil matter. It could be criminal. Embezzlement, fraud." He swallowed hard. "I know. I can't stand by anymore. Marcia bullies the board into silence, but she's crossing lines that could destroy this community. Thank you for trusting me with this. I promise I'll handle it carefully." He nodded, then hurried off, leaving me with the envelope of explosive information. With Gregory's documents in hand, I spent the evening poring over every line, cross-referencing the entries with public records. My eyes burned from hours staring at my computer screen, but the more I read, the more outraged I became. The financial statements made it painfully clear. Marcia was abusing her authority for personal gain, manipulating HOA funds to pad her niece's bank account and possibly her own. At the same time, she was doubling down on decisions, like removing streetlights, under the guise of budget constraints. This wasn't mere arrogance. It was corruption. I prepared a binder, labeling sections with tabs, evidence of unauthorized expenditures, possible conflict of interest, fraud indicators, etc. My plan was to confront Marcia at the next board meeting, or, if she refused to capitulate, take the evidence to law enforcement, potentially open an investigation. Aisha, my best friend, dropped by that evening. I showed her the documents, and she let out a whistle. Girl, you've got her cornered. This is bigger than just some petty HOA infighting. She's actually stealing from everyone in the neighborhood. Looks that way, I said grimly. I have enough to raise suspicion, though I need more confirmation. If the amounts are large enough, this could be a felony. She's endangering people's safety and using the money for who knows what. Aisha shook her head. So what's your next move? I exhaled. I'll give her one last chance to do the right thing. Reinstate the streetlights and come clean about her misuse of funds. If she doesn't, I'll proceed with formal charges. Enough is enough. Secretly, I dreaded the confrontation. In my line of work, I'd face down murderers and mobsters, but Marcia had a special brand of cunning. She was petty, vindictive, and might lash out at me or my neighbors in new ways. Still, I couldn't ignore my duty or my conscience. It was a chilly Thursday evening when I headed to the clubhouse with my binder tucked under my arm. Despite not being an official HOA meeting night, I was determined to find Marcia and force a discussion. The parking lot was nearly empty. I saw Marcia's sleek black sedan, along with Gregory's station wagon and Joan's hatchback. The board was likely gathered for a private session. Perfect timing. I opened the clubhouse door to see the three of them around a small table, papers scattered. Marcia looked up sharply. What is the meaning of this, Miss Caldwell? She snapped. This is a closed board meeting. I strode forward, ignoring her protest. We need to talk. Gregory averted his eyes, clearly nervous. Joan fidgeted with her pen. Marcia folded her arms, attempting a steely facade. If this is about those streetlights again, we've already... It's not just about the streetlights, I interrupted. It's about fraud and embezzlement. You've been misusing HOA funds for personal gain. Marcia stiffened, her face growing pale. How dare you make such accusations? I placed the binder on the table and flipped it open. These records speak for themselves. Paid invoices from an Amberton Consulting LLC, which doesn't actually provide any real service. Financial disbursements labeled as miscellaneous reimbursements that coincide with bank deposits in your niece's name. I can go on. Joan gasped softly. Marcia, is this true? Marcia's gaze flicked from the binder to Gregory, clearly realizing he'd betrayed her. You slimy little. Gregory found his voice. I'm sorry, Marcia, but I won't let you ruin my reputation in the neighborhood. This is wrong. Marcia gripped the edge of the table. All right, so maybe my niece provided consultations about landscaping and aesthetic design. That's within her professional capability. I turned a page, pointing a line. Here's a $5,000 invoice for an alleged redesign plan. No documentation, no official proposals, no references to materials or hours. Just a check signed by you. That's not standard procedure. The total sum diverted to your niece's company is over $40,000 this past year alone. That's the board's decision. Marcia stammered, trying to regain footing. We had the majority. We voted on it. Where are the minutes documenting that vote? I asked. Gregory says none of these expenditures were ever formally approved. Joan, do you recall any such vote? Joan shook her head, tears in her eyes. No, there was never any open vote. Marcia banged her fist on the table. I'm the head of neighborhood aesthetics and compliance. I had the authority to allocate funds for neighborhood improvements. Not without transparency, I said, my voice unwavering. This is corruption, plain and simple. You lied about the need to remove streetlights to save costs, but all the while, you funneled money to your family. Because of that, the neighborhood is now suffering a crime spree. She rose from her chair, eyes flashing. You have no idea what it's like to run an HOA of this caliber. People are ungrateful, always complaining. I was trying to create a certain standard, something that would elevate property values in the long run. Gregory inhaled sharply. You're insane. People are getting hurt, Marcia, and you just want more money for yourself and your niece's worthless business. Enough. Marcia snapped her glare onto him. You're the one who gave her these documents, aren't you? You traitor. He shrank back, but I stepped between them. Don't blame him for exposing the truth. You did this to yourself. Her mouth worked silently, as though searching for some desperate retort. Finally, she spat. What do you want from me? Resign, I said flatly. Resign from the HOA, come clean about the financial improprieties, and reinstate the streetlights immediately. If you cooperate, we can discuss lesser charges or possible restitution agreements. If you refuse, I'll file charges that could lead to your arrest for fraud, embezzlement, or both. Marcia's face was chalk white. She looked at Joan and Gregory, who offered no sympathy, then back at me. You can't do this. You're overstepping your authority. I fixed her with a steady gaze. Marcia, I'm the Chief Prosecutor. I have an obligation to pursue wrongdoing. The evidence is here. I tapped the binder. The only question is whether you'll make this right or dig your hole deeper. She blinked rapidly, fear flickering in her eyes. Fine, she breathed. Well, we'll come up with a plan. I will talk about it. Her capitulation was reluctant, but it was a start. Joan let out a sigh of relief, while Gregory quietly nodded in approval. I seized the moment. We'll hold a special HOA meeting in 2 days to finalize everything. Everyone in the community will be there to hear your confession and to see the plan for reinstating the streetlights and restoring funds. If you don't show up, or if you try to run, we'll have grounds for immediate legal action. Marcia sank into her chair, staring at the table in stunned silence. Word spread like wildfire that Marcia had been confronted about financial misdeeds. As soon as we announced the special HOA meeting, neighbors responded with a flurry of texts, emails, and calls. There was anxiety, relief, and even some suspicion that she might try something desperate to save face. For my part, I prepared the final bits of documentation. I'd show enough evidence to the community to prove Marcia had been defrauding everyone, but not so much that it jeopardized any future criminal case. I was walking a fine line between accountability and prosecutorial duty. 2 nights before the meeting, I was at home, reviewing my notes. The darkness outside made the windows into mirrors, reflecting my tired face. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Back off. This is bigger than you think. My heart pounded. Was Marcia threatening me, or someone acting on her behalf? I stared at the message, considering my options. Eventually, I decided to ignore the intimidation. But I did take precautions, enabling security cameras around my home and alerting local law enforcement to keep an extra eye on my property. The following day brought more petty chaos in the neighborhood. Another car break-in was reported, and a few more neighbors received nasty letters from the HOA's compliance office, likely dated before Marcia realized her empire was crumbling. People were at their wits' end. Finally, the day of the special meeting arrived. Most residents seemed to sense we were at a tipping point. The clubhouse was again packed, tension even higher than before. I saw fear on some faces, but also hope that we might finally see justice done. The clubhouse brimmed with expectant chatter. Everyone craned their necks, waiting for Marcia's arrival. Gregory and Joan were already seated at the front table, avoiding eye contact with each other, both looking tense. At precisely 7 p.m., Marcia entered. She wore a conservative skirt suit, her hair neatly styled, an attempt to project authority. Yet her usual swagger was missing. She walked stiffly, her face etched in a mix of defiance and defeat. Gregory banged the gavel. This special meeting is convened to discuss vital financial and safety matters. First, Ms. Caldwell, if you would. I stood, carrying my binder to the podium. Thank you, Gregory. Then I addressed the gathering. Neighbors of Laurelwood Park, Many of you are aware that the removal of our streetlights has led to significant safety concerns. Over the past weeks, we've seen a rise in crime directly tied to the lack of illumination. Beyond that, new evidence shows that our HOA funds were misallocated to projects that did not benefit this community. As Chief Prosecutor, I've investigated the matter and have reason to believe criminal wrongdoing is involved. A ripple of shock and murmurs spread. Marcia stared at the floor. I continued, Marcia Amberton, head of Neighborhood Aesthetics and Compliance, has agreed to address these matters tonight. All eyes turned to her. Marcia swallowed, then stood, shoulders rigid. She clutched the podium as though it might steady her. Good evening, she said, her voice quivering slightly. I understand there are concerns about the finances. I want to make it clear that everything I've done has been in the interest of this community's long-term well-being. A wave of protest rippled through the crowd. Lies, someone shouted. Marcia raised a hand, trying to maintain composure. Due to unforeseen circumstances, she continued, the board was forced to reduce costs. Removing streetlights was never intended to create hardship, only to balance the budget. However, in the process, I may have approved certain expenditures that, while intended to enhance Laurelwood Park's aesthetic appeal, did not follow the usual procedures. The tension in the room thickened. She looked over at me, and I nodded, silently urging her to continue. She took a trembling breath. Therefore, I tender my resignation as head of Neighborhood Aesthetics and Compliance, effective immediately. The remaining board members are free to appoint a replacement. Furthermore, I will cooperate with the relevant authorities to clarify how these funds were allocated. A thunderous applause erupted, not in celebration of her downfall, but in relief that the tyrant's reign was over. Marcia bowed her head, shame painting her features. Gregory spoke up, cutting through the clamor. The board will immediately begin the process of reinstating our streetlights. We've spoken with the electrical contractors, and they can start reinstallation this week. Also, I'll be working with Ms. Caldwell's office to rectify any misallocated funds and ensure they're returned to the HOA's accounts. The crowd cheered again, more fervently this time. Smiles broke out among neighbors as the weight of worry began to lift. A few people embraced. Others wiped tears from their eyes. Even I felt a surge of relief. Marcia stepped away from the podium. She looked small and vulnerable, all of her bravado gone. She slipped out of the clubhouse, quietly, sidestepping the crowd that parted around her. A hush followed her exit, the final punctuation on her era. In the days that followed, contractors arrived in the neighborhood. Trucks hauled in new light posts where old ones had been removed. Electrical crews worked day and night to rewire the lines that had been disconnected. The hum of construction activity filled the air, and for the first time in weeks, a sense of optimism prevailed. Neighbors bonded over shared relief. Families strolled in the evenings without fear, watching as each newly installed streetlight sparked to life. The petty crime wave dissipated rapidly as criminals lost the cover of darkness. Meanwhile, I met with local detectives to hand over the financial records that Gregory had provided. Marcia faced charges, fraud, and embezzlement, but a plea deal seemed likely if she made full restitution. The final outcome was still pending legal steps, but the biggest threat to the neighborhood had been neutralized. One crisp morning, I took a walk along Pinecrest Lane, the sidewalk bathed in the warm glow of newly reinstated streetlights. The sky lightened with early dawn. I passed neighbors who smiled and waved. Some paused to chat and thanked me for standing up to Marcia, for helping to bring the lights back. I accepted their gratitude humbly, insisting we all played a part. Laurelwood Park felt like a community again. Kids rode their bikes on the street without parents worrying. Couples walked their dogs at night, greeting each other under lampposts that stood like silent guardians. Porch lights twinkled in solidarity, no longer the sole source of illumination. Aisha visited one weekend, and we relaxed on my front porch, sipping iced tea. She gazed at the row of newly replaced streetlights. "You did it, Jen. You really saved this place from a total meltdown." I chuckled. It was a team effort. Besides, I couldn't stand by while that woman terrorized everyone. She nudged me with her elbow. I don't think the neighborhood will soon forget the day they found out their quiet, unassuming neighbor was actually the chief prosecutor who took down the big, bad Karen. I laughed, though a tinge of awkwardness remained. I do hope that from now on, I can just be Jennifer Caldwell, the neighbor who likes gardening and old detective novels. I don't need to be the center of attention. Aisha smirked. We'll see. As we chatted, the sun rose higher, casting bright rays across the homes. The fresh, clean scent of newly mowed grass lingered in the air, a reminder that life was moving on. In many ways, the darkness Marcia had introduced had become an opportunity for the neighborhood to unite. A new wave of volunteerism and neighborly spirit swept Laurelwood Park. People started a neighborhood watch, organized block parties, and renewed old friendships. Yes, the saga ended well. And though Marcia Curran Amberton faced her reckoning, in time, maybe she too would find a measure of peace, humbled by the consequences of her hubris. For the rest of us, the worst had passed. Nighttime in Laurelwood Park was once again illuminated by the soft glow of streetlights, and by the knowledge that when we stand together, we can dispel even the deepest shadows.